What I want you to see here is here in this moment, God brings Gideon here to this place. If it was not exactly here, we think this is pretty much the original site, okay? It's one of those places in Israel that a lot of people would say that this is the place. Well, you know, rivers and streams may change a little bit over the years, but we're very close to the place that this happened. And so God says, I want to bring you here and I want to thin down your army, because there are far too many of you to go against the Midianites, not because what will happen is that you'll fight the battle, then you'll take the credit for it, okay? I mean, sometimes we take credit for stuff that God did for us, all right? And so we get all big head about it. We think we did something, and God says, I want to make sure that that doesn't happen to you, and so I'm going to thin down your crowd down to 300. Now, there would have been thousands of Midianites against 300 of Gideon and his army. And so God was going to show him there in that moment, show Gideon and all the others the degree of his power. And so if you read on in the story, you realize how it happened, how God used the process of some lanterns that were used, and how they broke the lanterns, and the light spread in a significant way, Gideon having divided his army into groups of 100. And so the Midianites actually thought there were far more men than there really were, but actually there were only 300, and they had this massive, amazing victory. So a couple of things that I want to just leave you with today, and then you'll have some time just to sort of hang out in this site just for a few moments. First of all, the backdrop of this is the story of Gideon being called by God at a place where he had been experiencing massive fear. And there in that moment when God called him, God revealed one of his names to Gideon, and one of those names of God is Jehovah Shalom. Say that with me, Jehovah Shalom. God showed Gideon that day, I am the Lord who is your peace, okay? And so Gideon had an awareness that whatever he was going into it with Yahweh Shalom, Yahweh Jehovah who is Shalom. And so it was that backdrop of the peace of God that when God said, how many of you know that when God says you got too many, I'm not thinking I don't have too many, I need more, okay? But when God says you've got too many, then you're able to handle that because you already know that who is with you. The Lord who is peace is already with you. So he had that backdrop, and this is what you and I need to remember, that as you walk through life, you need to hold on to the promises of God, okay? Because it's the promises of God that'll get you through the battles of your life, okay? God's promises are things that you need to know and hold on to. So Gideon had that promise of God that he is Jehovah Shalom. And so when God told him, thin down your army, he knew that still everything was going to be okay, because with the peace of God, there was the awareness that God would not only come in peace, but God would also come in power. And so my encouragement to you today is that you will become very, very familiar in your life with the promises of God. They're not just meant to be known, they're meant to be claimed. Think about a promise of God. It's like a check that God has written you, and he's saying, here's a check. I've written it out in your name. Here's a promise. But you have to, when you have a check, back in the old days, most of us don't do this with checks any longer, but back in the old days with a check, you took it to the bank or someplace to get it cashed, and you actually had to do something. What did you have to do? You had to endorse the check, okay? You had to sign it. So the money did not become yours until you endorsed it. And so think of the promises of God that way, that God's promises given to you are like a check, that God says, here's what I want to do in your life. Now I want you to add your faith to it, okay? You endorse it. You put your name on it. And when you put your name on it, it's cashed for reality in your life. So Gideon lived in the promise. Let me encourage you to live in the promise of God as well. Amen?